Who do you think you are? Questioning me like that? The older man barked, his voice sharp and indignant, every syllable coated in entitlement. I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse. I held his gaze steady and said, Mr. Nguyen, keeping my tone calm, I'm here to help you. But if you want that help, I need the whole picture. Every detail. He exhaled hard through his nose, clearly not used to being challenged. Especially not by someone like me, a 30-year-old woman with a name he didn't recognize, a face he couldn't place, and a demeanor that didn't bend. But he didn't argue again. That's usually how it went. Men like him always underestimated women like me, until they realized they couldn't afford to. I'd built a reputation at Cross and Roberts for taking impossible cases and forcing order out of chaos. I was sharp, relentless, and unshakably composed. What they didn't know was that I didn't come from money, or legacy, or some long line of powerful attorneys. I came from absolutely nothing. No last name worth remembering. No family to speak of. Just fire. Pure, controlled fire. My name is Danielle, and it's the only name I've ever had, because the one I was born with, I chose to forget. When I was 6 years old, my parents left me at an orphanage and never came back. I don't mean they died. I don't mean they lost custody or fell into hardship. I mean they walked me through the front doors of St. Alora's home for children, dressed me in my nicest yellow dress with tiny white daisies, told me we were going somewhere special, and then disappeared without a second glance. I remember it vividly. How could I not? The bright morning sun, my small hand wrapped in my mother's, the way she smiled at the receptionist while her grip trembled just slightly. She knelt in front of me, brushed a loose strand of hair from my face, and said, "You'll love it here, sweetheart. They'll take such good care of you." "When are you coming back?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Her smile cracked at the edges. "Soon," she said. "Be good, okay?" She stood. She walked away, and the door never opened for her again. At first, I waited, for hours, then for days, and then, one night, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was surviving. St. Alora's was not a place for softness. It was clean, orderly, and suffocatingly quiet. The caretakers rotated so often I stopped learning their names. No one asked why I didn't cry. Maybe because they already knew the answer. I buried my questions and replaced them with resolve. If my parents didn't want me, fine. I'd make sure the world did. Books became my obsession. I read everything: law books, mythology, classic novels, medical textbooks, even phone directories when there was nothing else. The other kids teased me, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to get out. The ache of being left behind never truly faded, but I learned to compress it, tuck it into the spaces between ambition and duty. It made me sharper. I earned scholarships, won every academic competition I could, and by the time I was 16, I had a list of college acceptance letters longer than any social worker had ever seen. But there's something you should know. Even with everything I achieved, I never used my real last name. Not once. I picked Danielle out of a book when I was 9. And that was it. That was who I became. That was the girl who got out. And that girl never looked back. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Until last week. Until a client walked into my office, a man with a face too familiar to ignore. With a name I hadn't spoken out loud in over 2 decades. Mr. Nguyen. The name on the file didn't hit me until I opened it. Until I saw the business it was tied to, Nguyen Holdings. And that name used to be mine. I stared at it for a long moment. Stunned, cold, numb. I didn't say anything right away. I just smiled and extended my hand. Like nothing inside me was crumbling. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. To him, I was just another polished professional behind a desk in a Manhattan high-rise. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. Because this wasn't just any client. This was my father. It took everything I had not to walk out of that room the moment he said his name. Nguyen. The same name I used to write in crayon on my school books, before I stopped using it entirely. Before I made a promise to myself that I would never need it again. But there he was, my father, sitting across from me in a crisp suit. A little older, a little grayer, but with the same sharp gaze and clipped tone I remembered from that one and only memory. And somehow, he looked smaller, not in stature, but in presence, like something inside him had caved in. And he was trying desperately not to show it. He didn't recognize me, not the shape of my face, not the way I said his name, not even when I looked at him like I'd been staring through that orphanage window for 24 years. I told myself I was fine with that. I told myself it was better that way. But my hands were shaking under the table. After he left the conference room, I closed the file slowly, trying to process what had just happened. I felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. And I was floating somewhere between rage and disbelief. I needed air. I needed space. So I did what I hadn't done in over a decade. I went back. The orphanage had changed. A fresh coat of paint. A new director. Updated playground equipment that looked less like a prison yard. But it still smelled the same, cleaning supplies and loneliness. Claire, the current director, welcomed me like I was a returning donor. I didn't correct her. I was hoping, I said quietly, that you might have some records. From the early 2000s. A girl named Danielle, no last name on file. She nodded, professional but curious. We keep everything. Come with me. Her office was small and cluttered, just like Mrs. Patel's used to be. She pulled a dusty manila folder from a file cabinet and set it on the table between us like it might bite. I opened it slowly, the way you open a letter you've waited your whole life for but already know will break you. The intake sheet was the same one I remembered glancing at once when I was 9. Age, 6. Name, Danielle. Status, surrendered. No signs of abuse. No medical issues. No relatives on record. Under reason for placement. Someone had written, in neat handwriting, cultural prioritization of male heir. Unable to provide equal resources. I don't know why that line hit me harder than anything else. Maybe because it was so clinical. So detached. Like I'd been a financial inconvenience. A line item, not a daughter. I flipped through more pages, notes from caretakers. Monthly evaluations. A drawing I vaguely remembered scribbling. A family in crayon. Mom. Dad. A boy with a balloon. No girl. I'd stopped drawing myself into the picture even then. At the back of the folder was a photocopied newspaper clipping. Folded twice. I opened it carefully. It was a profile piece. A local business feature. Uwin Holdings expands to overseas markets. There was a photo. My parents. Smiling. Proud. Standing beside a boy no older than 10. Dressed in a blazer. His hair perfectly combed. My brother. Ba Nguyen. I stared at his face, trying to find even a flicker of recognition. I couldn't. He was a stranger who got everything I was denied. The house, the name, the love. And now, according to the file on my desk, he had run the company into the ground. The twist hit me like a slap. They had cast me aside to focus all their energy on a perfect heir. And that heir was now begging my firm to keep them out of bankruptcy court. I sat there in Claire's office for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Do you want to keep the file? She asked softly. I didn't answer. I just nodded. That night, I went home and didn't say a word to Mark. He could tell something was off. But he didn't push. He never did. I sat on the couch long after he went to bed. The orphanage file on my lap. The company file in my hands. It felt like I was holding two timelines that had never meant to cross again. One was the past I'd fought so hard to escape. The other was the future they never thought I'd control. But now they were crashing into each other. And I was the only one holding the wheel. Part of me wanted to burn both folders and walk away. But a louder part, deeper, older, hungrier, wanted to see this through. Not out of revenge, not yet, but because I needed to know what kind of people could abandon a daughter, and then walk blindly into her office 2 decades later, asking her to fix the mess they made. And because if I was going to face them again, I needed to be the one asking the questions this time. I didn't sleep the night before the meeting. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me, trying to silence the storm inside my chest. My daughter's baby monitor blinked quietly from the corner, and I found myself watching it, wondering how anyone, could look into the eyes of their 6-year-old child and still choose to walk away. But mine had. And tomorrow, they'd walk through my conference room door, with no idea who I was. At 10:58 a.m., I was already seated at the long glass table. My blazer pressed, my hair pulled back tight. The file for Uin Holdings was open to the summary page. Everything about me screamed poise and control. But underneath the table, my hands were locked so tight my knuckles ached. At exactly 11 o'clock, the door opened, and they walked in. My father was first, impeccably dressed, tired, but proud. His eyes scanned the room like he was already calculating his exit plan. Behind him was Ba, my brother. The boy they'd chosen. The boy I had studied in newspaper clippings like some distant royal. He looked older now, maybe 33. His face was more angular. His jaw tense. He carried a leather portfolio and the weight of failure clinging to him like smoke. Neither of them flinched when they saw me. No recognition. No pause. No flicker of familiarity. I stood, shook both their hands, introduced myself as Ms. Danielle from Cross & Roberts. And they said, "Pleasure to meet you," like it wasn't the second time they'd abandoned me. We sat. I clicked my pen once, then placed it carefully beside the folder. "I've reviewed the summary of your case," I began, my voice steady. Uin Holdings is facing multiple civil suits and a pending investigation from the state's Financial Regulatory Board. According to your filings, liabilities exceed assets by approximately $12.4 million. Ba shifted in his seat, discomfort flashing across his face. "I inherited a system that was already bleeding money," he said, defensive. Some of the older executives. I raised a hand slightly. "We're not here to place blame. We're here to find a way forward." My father nodded, lips pursed. I continued, "Before we can build a defense, I need to see full internal records, expenses, executive bonuses, offshore holdings, if any." Ba glanced at his father, then back at me. "That might be difficult." "Difficult doesn't mean impossible," I said sharply. My father leaned forward then, hands clasped. "Ms. Danielle," he said, his voice dipping into a lower register. "We've worked hard to build our legacy. This company was our family's pride." Family. The word sat heavy in the air between us. I could feel it settle on my shoulders. Like a dare. "I understand," I replied, "but your pride isn't going to protect you in court." There was a flicker of something behind his eyes, anger. Maybe shame. And then, as casually as anything, he turned to Ba and said, "Remember that old toy you had? The elephant one? The day we lost it. You cried so hard I had to leave a board meeting early." Ba laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, I don't even remember what it looked like." "I do," he said, smiling faintly. "It was blue, with a little tear in the ear. You carried it everywhere." I watched him as he spoke, describing that toy with more detail than he'd ever given me. He didn't remember me, but he remembered a damn elephant. I felt something break inside me. Quietly, completely. And I knew I would never be the same again. I stared at the man in front of me, at the lines in his face, at the ring on his finger he never removed. He hadn't changed. He hadn't grown. He'd just aged. And still, he had no idea that the woman sitting across from him, asking for spreadsheets and liability reports, was the same girl who once waited hours by the orphanage door. Too scared to ask why her mother wasn't coming back. "Do you have children, Ms. Danielle?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. "Yes," I said softly. "I do. A daughter." He nodded like it was a pleasant fact. Something light and ordinary. I clenched my jaw so hard I felt my teeth ache. Because that's when I realized he wouldn't have asked me that if he knew. He still didn't know. I could scream it right now. I could slam the file shut. Stand and say it out loud. "You left me. You forgot me. I'm your daughter. And you're in my office begging for help." But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't need him to remember to know who I was. He'd erased me from his story. But he was still in mine. And now I held the pen. I spent the next 3 days preparing the full case review. Not as their daughter, as their counsel. Every invoice, every memo, every reckless investment Ba had made under the illusion of invincibility, I laid it out in a 10-page executive summary. Framed not with spite, but with precision. That was how I would confront them. Not by shouting, but by showing them, in black and white, how the empire they chose over me was crumbling, brick by gilded brick. When they arrived for the second meeting, I was already waiting. My father nodded politely. Ba barely met my eyes. Maybe he sensed what was coming. Maybe he was just tired of being the golden son with blood on his hands. I didn't bother with small talk. Let's begin. I walked them through the findings. Quiet, clinical, ruthless. The offshore subsidiary registered in Malaysia, gone. Dissolved 6 months ago after a failed development deal. Ba winced. The internal memo showing inflated revenue projections to secure investor capital? Fraudulent. And prosecutable. My father straightened in his chair. We had no knowledge of. I have your signature, I said, sliding a copy forward. You approved it. Silence. I let it hang. Then, your assets are misaligned. Your liabilities are worsening by the week. And the lawsuits from former employees, especially the class action, will bury you if we don't settle immediately. He leaned forward, trying to reassert control. We're not paying out millions to disgruntled staff. That's not how business works. I tilted my head. And yet, that's exactly how the law works. You ran a sinking ship and made everyone else drown first. Ba finally spoke. We came here for help. Not to be humiliated. I'm not humiliating you, I said quietly. I'm giving you a mirror. My father's mouth tightened. Who do you think you are? Questioning me like that? His voice cut sharp. His tone no longer professional. There it was. The same arrogance. The same brittle pride that once led him to walk out of my life with a straight back and a clean conscience. I didn't flinch. I closed the file gently. Do you remember the yellow dress? I asked suddenly. He blinked. What? The yellow dress, I repeated, with little white daisies, size 6. You had it picked out for a special day. He stared at me, confused, eyes narrowing. You held her hand, I said. You walked her down a long hallway that smelled like bleach and stale air. You knelt down, looked into her face, and told her she'd love it there. My voice didn't crack. It burned. I was 6, and I waited by the door for 3 days before I understood you weren't coming back. His face changed, not with recognition, but with something worse, denial. That's not possible, he said quickly. That girl's name was Danielle, I interrupted. That's the name I gave myself. Because I didn't want to carry yours. Silence. Ba's face went white. My father looked at me like I was a ghost that had stepped out of a photo he'd locked in a drawer. You left me, I said, because I wasn't what you wanted. Because I was a daughter. And he, I pointed at Ba, was the heir you thought would never fail. He opened his mouth, closed it. Suddenly, the room felt smaller, tighter, like we were all trapped in something we'd built together, only now. I was the only one holding the key. You walked out, I said, softer now, and you didn't even look back. You went on to build a business, a life, another child, and now, here I am, the one person who might be able to save you from the wreckage. His voice broke through the stillness. I didn't know. I thought you'd been adopted. I thought. You didn't think at all. I said. You just erased me. Tears stung at the back of my eyes. But I wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not for him. Do you want me to fix this company? I asked. To take your files and argue your case in court like none of this ever happened? He nodded, slowly. Then you'll do it on my terms. I said. No lies. No pride. No power games. You will listen to me. Follow my counsel. And sit quietly while I clean up the disaster you handed your son. I looked at Ba then. And you will resign from all executive duties effective immediately. I want it in writing by end of day. His mouth opened. You can't. I can, I said. And I just did. They didn't speak for a while. Finally, my father asked, why are you even helping us? That was the part that stunned him. That I hadn't thrown it all into the fire. I stared at him for a long time. Then I said, because I'm not like you. And I meant it. I didn't go into the office the next day. I couldn't. Instead, I sat on the floor of our living room with Mia asleep on my chest. Her tiny breaths rising and falling against my collarbone, while the case files sat unopened on the coffee table just a few feet away. It would have taken nothing to reach over and grab them. Just a lean, a stretch of the arm. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Because I knew, whatever decision I made next, it would define everything. I'd spent years building a life so far away from them. I almost believed I'd outrun the damage. And now, in the quiet of this living room, with the weight of a new generation asleep in my arms. The past had come roaring back like it never left. They were in trouble. They needed help. And now, they knew who I was. After the confrontation, they hadn't said much. My father had gone pale, folded in on himself like a balloon slowly losing air. Ba had refused to look me in the eye. Their shame wasn't loud, it was quiet. Like the air just stopped moving around them. They hadn't begged. They hadn't denied it, either. They just sat there, finally seeing me for the first time, and realizing they didn't even know what they were looking at. I thought that moment would bring satisfaction. But instead, it brought silence. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Because they didn't fight for me then. And they weren't fighting for me now. Just for themselves. That evening, Mark came home and found me exactly where he'd left me. "You haven't moved," he said gently, crouching beside me. I didn't want to wake her. I whispered. But he knew. He saw the file. He saw my face. And he knew the real reason I hadn't moved was because if I did, I'd have to choose. Mark sat beside me and rested his arm across my back. "You don't have to decide today," he said. But I did. Because time was running out. Because the firm needed an answer. Because my name was now tied to theirs. And because no matter how far I ran from it, this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. That night, I opened the file one last time. It was all there. The numbers, the consequences, the paperwork, the strategy that could save them, and the loopholes that could finish them off. I stared at it for what felt like hours, fingers tracing the edge of a paragraph I'd memorized days ago. All I had to do was pick up the phone, give the go-ahead, be the professional they now knew me to be. But a thought kept looping through my mind like a song I couldn't shake. What do they deserve? Do they deserve redemption? A second chance? Or do they deserve to watch the company they built on my erasure crumble beneath their feet? I closed the folder, exhaled, and walked out to the balcony. It was a warm night. The city glowed like it was trying to distract me. But nothing could. I pulled out my phone. Scrolled to the contact labeled Mr. Roberts, Managing Partner. My finger hovered over the call button. But I didn't press it. Instead, I recorded this. For you. Because I don't know what the right choice is. I don't know if being the better person means helping them or walking away. If it means rising above or finally letting them fall. What I do know is this. They didn't recognize me when they walked into that room. But they know who I am now. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. But what would you do? Would you burn the bridge and let them watch from the ashes? Or would you extend a hand, even if they never once offered you theirs? Would you save the family that threw you away? Or would you finally save yourself? I don't have the answer. Not yet. But one day soon, I'll have to choose. And when I do, it'll be the end of one story. And the beginning of something else entirely.